Hey guys, how's it going? Duke of Italy, your favorite lo-fi October and dynamic music YouTuber. I just thought about having a little fun with that intro today, as I don't normally have much fun with these anymore. It's so dark and cold now, as it's October. That's me acting like my seasonal depression isn't a summer thing for some reason. But I love, love, love the cold. And what's better for the cold than black metal? And what's better for the cold, enjoying some black metal, than 30 albums that someone else picked and arranged just for me? Not really, but I got the second best thing. It's someone who just arranged 30 albums and demos and stuff in this big old chart here. So this is the cold black metal chart. This is one I found off of Mew a long time ago, and it's been having some stuff that I've been saving for a long time, and I'm excited to cover it because this is the first black metal video I've made all year, and I just love black metal. That being said, it's the first dedicated black metal video of all year. The Caveman Riff chart I did back in the day. I say that like it was years ago, but a few months ago I did covered a lot of first wave black metal. So I'm excited to finally be more on track with my videos because I'm going to talk about some cold black metal, and I'm just going to say some properties about this chart already. So black metal charts are normally pretty similar, as there are so many. I have more charts of black metal than any other genre. I've probably got like 4 shoegaze charts. I've reviewed 2 black gaze charts. I've reviewed a math rock chart. I have probably 2 jazz charts. I've probably got like 3 or 4 like giant charts of just everything. I've got a whole bunch of stuff, but black metal more than anything else. And that's not just because black metal is my favorite genre necessarily, because I wouldn't necessarily call it my favorite genre. It's just the one that I return to most often because the aesthetics and this playing style is so interesting to me. But these charts all have something kind of similar. None of them are diagrams that point in specific directions. I'm going to make it a goal of mine one day to be able to potentially make one of those myself. A lot of them are essential black metal. Some of them are underappreciated black metal. Some of them are regional. Like I covered a Japanese black metal chart last year. Some of them are specific to a style, where it's atmospheric black metal or black gaze if you want to consider black gaze black metal. I've covered a couple of those charts, and I've never really considered it directly black metal. There are some key differences that make it different from the rest of the genre. There are also ones that cover specific styles, like symphonic black metal. I've yet to see something too dedicated for that, but I've seen aesthetics also be pointed to, such as medieval black metal, which I'll cover at some point. But, this is a very obvious, this is a softball pitch here that you just crack out of the park. Cold black metal. Metal for the winter. And I'm deciding, before Nothing But Black Metal in November, this would be an excellent chart for me to cover, get you guys all really in the mood for it. So without any further ado, let's actually get into these albums, because, for a chart that is so consistent in sound, and I seriously mean that, almost all of these albums are atmospheric black metal, a little on the slower side, really droney, even some wintry samples. There are the standouts of the genre. There's sort of like the great albums that do exactly what they need to do, and then there are the echelon above that do everything you could do. And then the albums that just fail completely because they do something that just is silly. And we're going to begin this whole thing with Cythereal's Nord. So this is a super classic melodic black metal album. And it's a little bit symphonic, There's a lot of dramatic sort of flourishes given with these synths here. And they blend in spectacularly. It is a very forceful and awesome sound. A lot of people like Emperor when they like their symphonic black metal because there's a certain amount of force in the whole thing. And that's where I like my symphonic black metal, where it blends in really well into the other styles of black metal, and that it has a lot of really excellent melodic qualities to it. And that's what's great about this album here. The symphonics aren't too deeply leaned into. This album is probably like 70% blast beats. I'm not sure why, but it's so many. It's just surging blasts. It's really fun, in all honesty. It has a lot of room for some really cool melodies. The riffs are extremely creative. They're excellent all around. There are even some amazing, more melodic solo sections, which you don't see that often in black metal. You might get it like once per album. A lot of artists don't do solos in their black metal. They consider it a much more rhythmic and straightforward genre, as opposed to something like death metal, which would much more often have solos. But here it works really well. The sense of sheer melodicism works really well with the whole thing. Don't expect a lot of slow moments on this album. It's very much a fast album. It's not as cold as this other stuff, but there's sort of like a mystical sense to the whole thing that really gives it that sort of cold atmosphere that we've all been wanting. It is intense, though. Every riff is so captivating. There are some really progressive structures, as these songs can easily reach up to 8 minutes long, that just wind through all these really interesting directions, and it also feels very logical at the same time. No change has ever felt like unnecessary or that it wasn't done at the right time. It feels like an album that works really well for itself. And I think it is great. I think in the past I said it was good. I like it more now, I guess. And next we reach what straight up might be the best album on this whole chart. This is Bluthaus Nord's Ultima Thule. Bluthaus Nord is a band known for making industrial tinged black metal, and a lot of black metal that is sort of spacey and crushing and hellish. Past like 10 years they've been doing that. Around the early 2000s they were doing the industrial side of black metal. But this is the album right here. This is the Bluthaus Nord album. This thing is so stupidly cold and lonely. This album cover of like this wrecked Viking ship, it really feels like you're in this tundra of a land that is so stupidly lonely. This feels like Burzum for even older than medieval times. It's like Burzum for like Viking times, where like it's just as lonely and just as much havoc. It's super, super interesting. It has this fantastic, immensely pervasive atmosphere. If you go on like a walk with this thing, you will feel like you're in the land of Thule. It is an incredibly creative blend with some really cool dungeon synth underneath the whole thing, but the dungeon synth textures are so perfectly well done and they're so perfectly placed out. It only comes in when it needs to, and it's all very excellent. Every song has interesting and exceptional riffs, and you never get any song here that sounds like the song before it. You know, nothing is just completely blast beats the whole time. You get some more doomy stuff. You get, the Burzum influence is clearly here. Like, it sounds a bit like Philosophem, where every song has something different going on. But the only thing that is similar to all of it is that every riff is really captivating. It's something that's super memorable, maybe not too complex, but you will have different points of syncopation, a little bit of a hooky nature to some of this stuff, and at the same time, it is so dense and it feels monotonous and like you're wading through slush the whole time. There's a decent amount of doomy heaviness to this whole thing. The little tinges of doom are something that really carries this album to a whole other degree. I think it is one of the tightest black metal performances I've ever heard. Genuinely, one of the best black metal albums I have ever heard. I might put it in like a top 10, in all honesty. It's not number one, but it is that phenomenal. This thing is great. This is the album to check out from this chart. And next we get Moonblood with Bluten Krieg, which is an old German classic album with some punky vibes to the whole thing. And there's a really organic, raw production style, which sounds excellent. You know, that's kind of how black metal should be to an extent. And there's a nice blend of more atmospheric, long-winded riffing with some more easier, more straightforward riffs that maybe something like Under a Funeral Moon by Darkthrone might provide you. There's almost like a little bit of Hate Force influence on the caveman sort of atmo riff style. It really just drills in, and it feels really aggressive, you know, that the title of Bluten Krieg really makes sense for some of these riffs here. You know, you get a lot of aggression that you wouldn't really expect. The vocals also have some real presence to this whole thing. You know, they're mixed a little higher than your standard buried black metal vocals. They sound fantastic. It's also hypnotic to a degree, which sounds really cool. I mean, I love when black metal is hypnotic. It's not something you hear all the time. It's got a lot of heart, some serious momentum, and the atmosphere is pretty airtight. This album is also great. Believe me, the cream is rising to the top here. You know, it's not going to always be this fantastic of a chart. There are some duds on here, but I'm happy to recommend you guys so many in a row. And the next band is Beketh Nazimu, a band that is known for lightly symphonic, mostly ambient style black metal. And this is De Dunkla Hirarna, which it's their debut. It is the first Beketh Nazimu album. And this is a band known for being stupidly cold. It's got definitely some Paysage d'Hiver influence with the synths, the really long-winded atmospheric black metal riffing, but it's got the synths kind of incorporated in almost a symphonic way. The synths have a bit more layers to them. It's not as long-winded as Paysage d'Hiver, which nothing's colder than Paysage d'Hiver. That stuff literally feels like you're frozen from the neck down. It's a little rough around the edges as far as atmospheric black metal goes, but I think it shows a lot of promise, as this is a band that does improve later in their career. Honestly, there is a bit too much reverb placed in the whole thing. It's kind of artificial sounding, and it doesn't exactly tie everything together as it should. but it is mystical, and its slow pace is really unique. It does have some excellent droney synth moments that I think tie the album together better than most of the other elements here. This album here is, like, some people kind of debate if it's a promotional demo or not. I was finding a hard time finding if it even was a demo, but you can tell that it was kind of building up hype for the band rather than being a secure project. I still think it's good. This is a band that conceptually is really cool. They show a lot of promise, and they make a lot of really cool albums. This just isn't their best. And speaking of not their best, this is Summoning's Lugers. As a Lord of the Rings fan, you'd think I would know how to pronounce that correctly, but this is the debut of a band with much more interesting later material, as Summoning made symphonic black metal their, I can't say that word, but they did with symphonic black metal what no other band could do. They took a symphonic metal route that actually was good. Here's the thing about symphonic metal. It sucks. It's really bad. But symphonic black metal is often maligned. Not a lot of people love symphonic black metal, and there's a lot of symphonic black metal that is just not very good in general. But Summoning did it spectacularly. They have this drum machine usage that is so iconic and martial feeling, and the riffs are a lot more progressive feeling than most black metal riffs, not overly tremolo picked, but it's just got this slow marching pace to the whole thing. It really has a dungeon synth pace to everything, and yet the riffing is really captivating. The vocals are excellently done. The songs are super atmospheric. The synth tones are super interesting. All you got to do is check out Stronghold, probably their most known album, for some really iconic synth layers. That's definitely a band I should probably honestly review their entire discography. I think that would be a super fun band to cover, maybe next year if you guys are good little Duke of Italy fans. But this album has a real drummer, and he is one of the better elements of the whole thing, funnily enough, even though the band gets a ton better on their next release, Minas Morgul, with the omission of a drummer. But I think their drummer here is one of the better parts. He's got some real skill. There's also very little bass presence, which is a mixing issue, but it's raw black metal, but not entirely raw. It is a full-length album. It is decently atmospheric, but it is very inconsistent in its quality. There is a great blend of guitar sounds, but for some reason every single song here is mixed differently, like they all have something different to prove, when in reality they all end up blending together a little bit in terms of the riffs, the progression. The songs Dragons of Time and Eternal Land of Fire are definitely bangers, but also the symphonic opening is pretty fun, but I think the rest of the album lacks in the quality the band would later come upon. So I think it's okay. It's very clearly necessary for Summoning fans, and no one's going to knock it for trying to get into the Austrian black metal scene, not Australian, Austrian black metal scene. You have to listen to Summoning, and covering their whole discography, no one's going to knock you for it. But in terms of quality, it's just not a great album. And speaking of artists with better material, Eisenguard with Vinterskug. This is Fenris's solo project, where he does a bit more of a punky black metal thing, but more importantly, a more folky black metal thing. It's music to prance to act like a goblin to, and it's music that is oddly mixed for having clean vocals. Fenris is not a great singer by any means. He does great harsh vocals, but he is not a great singer, which a lot of black metal projects do embrace the pagan side of things and do some clean vocals, and it's very mixed results. I think Enslaved is a band that didn't get good clean vocals until a couple albums into their career, in all honesty. Bands like that, the clean vocals have been rough pretty often, but I think here, they're passable. They had some charm to them. But it's pretty Darkthrone-esque at points, which makes sense because Fenris is and was in Darkthrone. And for a demo compilation, it's a good look at a lot of material. A lot of people would claim Eisenguard to be an essential band. I wouldn't really think they're essential. I think they're good for a glance at and really just acknowledging that they existed. But there's not a ton of value that I personally get out of them. I do think Eisenguard's 1989 demo is really interesting, as that sort of predates any Darkthrone full length. It's just extreme thrash metal, really, with some harsher vocals. But I think Fenris, he does it pretty well. And it doesn't feel complete as a listening experience because it's a compilation of different styles. There is an empty bass sound, and the drumming is excellent, though, as Fenris's main thing is the drumming. It's pretty dynamic, it's pretty fun, and it is usually pretty raw. It sounds rough around the edges, which is super fun. There's also a little bit of dungeon synth on here, which I guess Fenris would bring back for his Neptunian Towers project, which is just straight up dark ambient, but dungeon synth is pretty adjacent. I think there's a lot of potential with this thing here. I like the folky vibes on the whole thing. I think it's overall an okay listening experience. I would probably recommend you listen to it at least one time, because it covers so much ground. It's decently long. You get to hear a lot of what Fenris's just history of an artist is, and I think it's really cool, but don't expect amazing quality. Up next is the band Forteresse with, and I don't speak French, Les Hivers de Note de Not Epoque. I don't know. I have no idea. That was my best shot. I don't respect French as a language, so if I mispronounce it, that's the only one I'm not sorry about. But don't tell Forteresse I said that, because I actually really like their music. And with a metal noir Quebecois, which is their debut, you would expect them to have a very, very clear style that lasts throughout their whole discography. Really slow, atmospheric black metal with fast blast beats, but slow chord transitions. And it is some really cold stuff. It's very nationalist stuff. It feels a bit like Hate Forest, but a little less hateful, a little more prideful. But on this album, that is not the case. After just 5 seconds of listening, you can tell just how based this album is going to be. It's ambient leaning. It has super, super buzzy guitars. It's certainly different for the band, but it is just so good. There are tons of slow, almost DSBM inspired, like really doomy sections that fill the space amazingly. It really provides some interesting tempo changes, adds a lot of dynamics to the project, which I think is phenomenal. It is super cold and very interesting overall, especially for the band in question here. The stylistic change is, you really watch them flourish with this release. It's super cold as well. You get a lot of really dynamic instrumental portions here. I'd say it's kind of like Ultima Thule that I mentioned earlier, the Bluthaus Nord record, where it's just so dynamic, it's so interesting overall, and the musicianship and composition is just nothing short of fantastic. But it's never gonna be that album. But if any one album here gets close to that, it's this one. I think this one is great as well. And then we get a band that I'm struggling to pronounce here, Grifteskimfning with Leeksalm, which is pretty standard for this chart. You're going to have a lot of albums that sound like this one. It's got a super hypnotic, atmospheric sound. It's honestly sick, and the way it's produced and mixed and the guitar tones, it sounds just perfect. And it's mostly mid to slow paced stuff, which really gives it almost less momentum, but I think it makes the album progress really well. I think it's got a really interesting aesthetic, and there are some really cool gloomy, almost acoustic sections here. And it is so hypnotic, I'm honestly going to need to re-listen, because this thing just kind of fills your brain with these clouds, the way it's just trotting. And it's got a really cool dynamic between some shorter songs with just a couple riffs and a really aggressive sort of note to the whole thing, and you got these really long winding tracks that sound really awesome. Kind of reminds me of Bluten Krieg a little bit, but a little less aggressive overall, a little more cold. But I think it's a great album, in all honesty. And next we reach the band Moloch with another impossible to pronounce album, Ein Düsterer Winterkommt, which is a 10-minute long EP, and it is certainly lo-fi. It's drony, filled with dissonant bar chords. It's sick stuff. It's got a really cool ambient mix throughout the whole thing, which is kind of like archetypal of this ambient atmospheric genre we've been working in here, and it's just great. There are some really weird spoken word sections, and the vocals are very moany. They sound kind of tortured, but I think it's kind of fun. It's a great mix of elements. It's good and lo-fi, and it's super noisy as well, really buzzy, sort of Wasp-sounding guitar tones. Not the glam metal band Wasp, the Insect. But yeah, it's great. If you like EPs and you listen to EPs all the time, then I recommend this one. And the next one is Laskowiec or Laskovich with Frostwinds of the Apocalypse, which is a really hard thing to find. You have to download it. Maybe I'll post a link in the description. I genuinely don't know. I don't want to have to find it again, but it's out there, I promise. If you look this up, I'll even spell it for you right here. If I could get the line right, there you go. You just look for that online and you just download it. Don't think there's going to be malware or anything. I don't think you need to risk it necessarily. It's a little goofy here. Really loud dungeon synth stuff going on just to kick it off. There are some decent Atmo Black riffs to this whole thing. It certainly doesn't have ideal production. The song Hail of Destruction kind of feels Burzum influenced, maybe by Black Spell of Destruction, but it's got some really doomy sort of Burzum vibes, like the really hostile atmosphere. The second Dungeon Synth track on the whole thing I think is alright. It's better than the first one. It is a album that is at its best when it is dark and dismal, which fortunately it is often dark and dismal. And the ending track to this whole thing is this really cool chanting sort of folky thing. Kind of reminds me of like Brannicald or Forest. Feels kind of Blazebirth influenced. In fact, you could probably argue this whole album is Blazebirth influenced. Just not as good as those bands. I think it's good. It's actually almost great to me. So if you guys are just aching for one more good album for this whole thing, or a great album really, then maybe give this band a shot. And up next we get a band that some people have been begging me to listen to. This is Evil Feast, Winter Moon Enchantment. It is certainly Burzum inspired, but with more layers of synths, which I think sounds pretty cool. It's cold, it's kind of epic feeling, and it's really varied. The guitar tone is super buzzy, and that's kind of like the main appeal of the whole thing. And it's certainly a long, grand album, but it totally works. It's even a bit progressive. You get some really comfy arpeggios all over this thing. The song The Wind in the Old Willows is totally Kino, one of the best stylistic choices on the whole album. Really fun track. I think this album's great. It's definitely one you guys gotta check out. And up next is the band On Weck with My Frozen Dreams Slept Too Eternally, which has these lovely synth passages on top of these really aggressive, driving, power chord bass riffs. It's really primitive stuff, which I think works in this case. And it's got the Burzum chainsaw tone, maybe some Swedish Death influence, except it's just cranked distortion. And it sounds super dismal. This thing is hopeless. It's certainly repetitive, and it's certainly long-winded. It's definitely more progressive than Paysage d'Hiver, but it is still drony. Don't worry, we will get to Paysage d'Hiver in time. And it is utterly reverb-soaked. Half of it sounds like a hallway, and it sounds just awesome. But yeah, it's great. And now we reach something a little bit more iconic. This is Cold World with Melancholy Squared, or Melancholy 2. This album's interesting as it has a lethargic yet really gripping momentum to the whole thing. If you like bands like Shining or Bethlehem, this certainly has a little bit more of that DSBM edge to the whole thing, except it is just a little bit more on the progressive side. That's not really to say it's as progressive as Shining, but I think it's got a little bit of that. This is an album I actually covered back when I originally reviewed my black metal chart 2020, Halloween 2020. We're about to do our third year of Nothing But Black Metal in November, so we've grown a whole lot. But this thing is dismal. It's got all sorts of different angles of DSBM all combined together. You get these really nice upfront and great harsh vocals. They sound ghastly, like they sound like a ghost, like they're given the right amount of reverb to really hit this cool image. It's got some really beautiful contemplative moments, and it's another band that you can tell there's some Burzum influence on the riffing here. The drums have this really cool density with this higher register that's given all this like airy sense of reverb, which really adds such a unique texture to the whole thing. The buzzy guitar lines are perfectly placed in the mix, not to mention they also riff spectacularly. The last track of the whole thing is what I originally complained about when I reviewed this all that time ago, because it starts off half as a down-tempo track that feels kind of alien to the whole album, and then ends with this really tight, amazing black metal conclusion. One of the best payoffs of the whole album. And yet, I think the down-tempo part, it's kind of a grower. You need to listen to it with an open mind, and then I think it has a lot of appeal like that. The album is just so airtight overall that I think it's worth dealing with or learning to like, because I think I've found myself liking it more and more. I think it works with the vibe of the whole thing. It's just not something that black metal is really used to. But this album is such a classic. I would almost feel bad calling it good, except I don't have to feel bad at all, because I actually just think it's great. Next we get Nordli with Nebelmir, which is a pretty short album. It's just 28 minutes long. It is certainly basic, which is basically the best kind of Atmo Black you can deal with. It is super raw and buzzy. It's super cold. It is literally mixed to sound like they are in a room next door to you. It doesn't sound like it's coming from your room. There are some occasional synths and some lightning fast guitars, which all tie together for somewhat of a dynamic album listening experience here, which I find quite enjoyable. The title track, Nebelmir, is my favorite track here. It almost has like an Atmo Black version of a breakdown. I couldn't even explain it that well to you guys, but I just listen to the track because it is spectacular. But I would suggest that more if I didn't just suggest the entire album. It's really an amazing cold piece of black metal, so I think it's great. And the last album for today, Vinland, Welcome My Last Chapter. Another one of the albums on this chart that I've covered before, along with the opening album of today. And I believe this might have been the one I didn't like as much, but it has grown on me. It is really comfy, straightforward, melodic black metal with a fantastic 2-guitar setup. Imagine the band Talk, but 2 guitars that are just both just shooting off. They have some really excellent high treble tones, like they're really, really fragile sounding, like they're really crispy. It's got some really great vocals with some fantastic reverb, and it gets more dreamy and wintry as it progresses. It's really interesting. It's got some excellent gloomy and sad atmosphere to the whole thing, which for being so melodic, it's got a lot of atmosphere. There's an atmospheric style of repetition that works with these really melodic riffs that works really great, which basically just means you write the best riff possible and you just loop it like atmospheric black metal for 8 minutes until you got a banger. There are also some great acoustic bits on this whole thing, which I think acoustic guitar can sound really frosty, and here it definitely does. For the last album of the day, it is great, which I'm not surprised that this chart is so fantastic so far. I mean, finding cold black metal albums that are great isn't hard. You could even look at the classics for a lot of fantastic stuff. And I just love everything that's been going in here except a couple albums. Next time, we're going to cover some a little more obscure stuff, some more demos, some longer albums, a lot of interesting stuff. We're going to have another 15 albums, and then we'll be wrapping up this little mini-series here before we get into Nothing But Black Metal in November. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you guys enjoyed this chart so far. I certainly did. I've been enjoying it immensely. Hopefully, I'm linking the download link to that one album in the description below. But I hope you guys enjoy this stuff. What's your guys' favorite cold black metal album? I'll probably respond to your comment. If you have any other comments, questions, or concerns even, down below in the comments. Also down below, if you click that little show more button, you're going to reach my social medias, my Instagram, Twitter, and Discord. I'd love to have you guys follow me on that stuff, or even join my Discord, where we'll be talking about black metal coming up here. Where just recently I've been getting one member into black metal a little bit. That they claimed will listen to the albums before the year is over. We'll see about that. But I'm really excited to see what you all think about this stuff, and for Nothing But Black Metal in November this year. Either way, that is about it. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'd appreciate it. Like and subscribe. And that's about it. Hope you guys have a good day. Bye.